Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the November 3rd, 2020 joint meeting of the Glendale City Council and Glendale Housing Authority. Due to evolving situation with COVID-19 and health recommendations from LA County Health Department, the Glendale City Council meeting will be available to the public electronically. Due to social distancing requirements, the public will not be able to attend the meeting. The meeting can be viewed on Charter and Spectrum Channel 6 and AT&T Uverse Channel 99. You may also stream online through our website, www.glendaleca.gov, by scrolling all the way to the bottom of the web page and selecting live streaming, which is the third icon from the left. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100, which is on the screen. Please do not call in advance of the agenda item. May I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Brotman. Here.
Here, your microphone's not on, Arm.
Kasakian. Thank you. Councilmember Kasakian.
Can't hear him. Yeah, he's there.
You're on mute, Artie.
Artie?
Artie, we have you as present.
Yeah, he's present. Then.
Councilmember Najarian.
Here.
Mayor Agajanian.
Present. Thank you. I guess we go to the housing.
Housing Authority, correct.
Correct. Ms. Devine?
Housing Authority, please, roll call.
Housing Authority member Agajanian.
Present.
Brotman.
Here.
Kasakian.
Here, can you hear me now?
Yes, council member. Authority member Najarian.
Here.
Authority member Parazian.
Here.
And Chair Devine.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
The agenda for the Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020 joint public meeting of the City Council and Housing Authority was posted on Tuesday, October 27, 2020 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item.
Next item would be management services regarding proclamation declaring November 11th, 2020 to be Paul Ignatius Day in Glendale.
Ms. Council Member Ara Najarian. Council Member Najarian. You're mute.
Councilmember Najarian, we can't hear you.
There you go.
You're live.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, and members of the Housing Authority. I know that Mr. Paul Ignatius is no stranger to us here in Glendale. He has been here several times and gave the Memorial Day speech several years ago. He's been present at the gala for the Armenian American Museum where we honored him. We talk about him all the time. There's a thread on social media currently authored by several residents who wanted to bring out and remind us about the great accomplishments of Mr. Ignatius, separate from what we were doing. They had no idea that we were doing this. And we were all together at the Armenian American Museum Gala, where we gave a city recognition to Mr. Ignatius. And at that time, I went out on a limb and I committed, prior to this vote, the dedication of a day, not just any day, but the 100th birthday of November 11th, 2020, Mr. Paul Ignatius. And we are so glad. We were hoping to bring him in person to Glendale, but due to the COVID restrictions, we are forced, as many of us across the country are, to meet by Zoom. However, we are fortunate that Mr. Ignatius is here today with us, not alone, though. He has his dear family with him also. And if those of you who can see the screen, maybe not, but he has his 4 children with him. And we're very proud of Mr. Ignatius, and the accomplishments of his children are also very quite noteworthy. I'm not sure if they surpass the father, but individually, but perhaps collectively, they come close. They come close to that. Mr. Ignatius is an incredible person, not just his life accomplishments, but he is incredibly sharp. He remembers things that I had forgotten about my own family, and he reminded me just a few moments ago about the aspirations of one of my children. Mr. Ignatius, we have a proclamation, but before we get into the wherefore and whereases, I want to give you the floor and perhaps give you a chance to introduce your children and invite them to say a few words also in your honor, being the perhaps most famous resident of Glendale to date. So, Mr. Ignatius, I would like to turn the floor over to you if my colleagues have no objection. But you're on mute. You're on mute, Mr. Ignatius.
Well, thank you very much for honoring me today, Mr. Mayor and council members. I've lived in a lot of places, but I still think of Glendale as home. I grew up there and had a happy time there, and I have just the fondest memories, one of them being the excellent schools, Hoover High School, Eleanor Toll Middle School, Mark Keppel. And I felt if I had never gone to college or graduate school, I still would have had a good education because of the excellent teachers at those schools that I mentioned. My family goes back a long way. My grandfather, A.M. Avidas Jamgochian, came to Glendale in 1911 and bought quite a lot of property on San Fernando Road, just below Brand Boulevard, and he built a large house there with a tennis court alongside. The house burned down in 1927 when the family were away on vacation. The area was called Tropico, and it later was incorporated, I think, into the town of Glendale. There was another famous resident, famous later in his life, but he was a young boy who lived near my grandfather's family, Edward Weston, and he became one of the great photographers of the 20th century. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts issued a large book a year or so ago of Weston's work in the Tropico early period. And my mother gave him his first art show. And when my Uncle Matthew was married, Edward Weston, this young teenager from Tropico, shot the wedding pictures, but later he became, as I say, a world famous photographer and a great credit to Glendale. So again, I thank you for honoring me, and it's a great pleasure. I'm so glad that David is at my side here. Adi is looking. He had his own show today. Adi's editor of the Harvard Business Review. Amy is a judge in New Hampshire. And Sarah has become an expert on Armenian history. She is the executive director of the National Association of Armenian Studies and Research in Boston. They've just built a new building. It's interesting, when I went to Hoover, I think the only kids from Armenian families were my brother and sister and I, and now it's a major change. I suspect, but I don't know, but I'll bet 40 or 50% of the students, it could be something like that at Hoover High School. And Armenians have always prized education, and it's good that they've got the benefit, those who live in Glendale, of those fine schools.
Thank you.
Um,
Mr. Najarian.
Mr. Mayor, I have your proclamation that if you don't mind, I will read.
Yes,
and then
please.
Perhaps, I know there's a few other items. Yes, as the original is being held by the mayor, and I will read the proclamation, and then perhaps we can turn it over back to my colleagues. I know that Hoover High School has a presentation, and maybe if Adi, Amy, Sarah, or David want to chime in, that would be fine too. Mr. Mayor, here is the proclamation. Whereas Paul Robert Ignatius was born in Glendale, California on November 11th, 1920, and whereas Mr. Ignatius attended Hoover High School, where he served as the student body president in 1938, and whereas Mr. Ignatius graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Southern California before joining the Navy during World War II and serving in combat as an ordnance officer. And whereas Mr. Ignatius returned to school to obtain his master's in business administration from Harvard Business School, and whereas Mr. Ignatius later served as Assistant Secretary of the United States Army under Secretary of the United States Army, Assistant Secretary of Defense, and then Secretary of the United States Navy under President Lyndon B. Johnson. And whereas Mr. Ignatius also served as both President and Executive Vice President of the Washington Post newspaper. And whereas the United States Navy in 2019 commissioned the 67th Arleigh Burke class destroyer ship USS Paul Ignatius for Mr. Paul Ignatius, and whereas Mr. Ignatius has provided decades of exceptional service as a public administrator for our community and for the entire United States of America. And now, therefore, you, Mr. Mayor Virej Agajanian, hereby proclaims November 11th, 2020 as Paul Ignatius Day in Glendale, and asks that the community honor Paul Robert Ignatius's legacy on this day and for decades to follow.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else wants to make any comments before we go? Do we have callers
We do
on
not.
this?
No callers.
No callers. Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment on Mr. Ignatius or something about Mr. Ignatius? Otherwise, I will read our mayor's commendation. Okay, so I just first want to ask if I guess David Ignatius is very famous reporter on Washington Post.
Yes.
He writes on a regular basis. I follow what he's writing, and I would like to thank him for that. If he wants to say a word about his dad, I'm sure experienced reporter, columnist have something to share with us. I'm sure.
I just want to say to everyone, thank you. It's wonderful to be able to celebrate Paul Ignatius Day a week from my father's birthday. It's a moment of joy for all of our family. And we're so grateful to you and everyone in Glendale for thinking of my dad and loving him as we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else, family members, they want to express a few words or add something to it? Okay. So I read.
This is Amy.
Yes.
This is Amy.
Okay.
I just wanted
Yes.
very briefly to agree with David at what an honor this is. You know, as we grew up, every day was Paul Ignatius Day. But we love having this honor to be able to just share our love and our admiration and to know that he's recognized in the town that he obviously remembers so fondly, and it's a lovely event. So thank you, we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Okay, City of Glendale, Mayor's,
If
I'm
I can
sorry.
unmute
yes,
for
please.
1 minute. This is
Yes.
Sarah Ignatius. And I think maybe even David said this about Pop, but the way we think of Pop is you can take the boy out of California, but you can't take the California out of the boy. And so Pop is through and through a Californian, a Glendale, Denison, no matter where he is. And he's given that to all of us, as well as all of his other incredible qualities that you've perhaps heard about today, or if you know him. He's a daily inspiration to us, his children, to his grandchildren, and to his great-grandchildren. So we're so grateful to have him with us at 100 years as he continues to influence, mold, and in the most positive of ways in his own spirit of positive energy and morality, very forward thinking. We derive immense strength from him, and we do feel the Armenian heritage is alive and well and thriving in him. So I just thank you so much, everyone in Glendale. Know how important this is to him and to all of us. We really, really appreciate the honor. So thank you.
No problem. Anybody else?
Well, yeah, I think at this point I better say something. You saw my father speak. I mean, he's almost 100 years old. His brain works better than any of ours. He has this astonishing memory. But when you talked about whether we could, approximate his accomplishments, I mean, I think we're all trying to do is to approximate his decency and his warmth. He just gets better. He gets better every day. It's inevitable when someone is approaching 100 to ask what his secret is. And, I think there are a lot of reasons why he has thrived to such an age. But more than anything else, in my mind, it's positivity. And you've seen that, in the past 7 or 8 months when we've all been on lockdown. And, my father lives alone in Washington, and luckily my brother's in the city and can visit him and bring groceries and things. But he's on his own. But he just has this spirit, this can-do positive spirit that's gotten him through this difficult period and has gotten him through life in a really wonderful, positive way. So happy Paul Ignatius Day to Paul Ignatius.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yes.
Well, this is an overwhelming experience for me, and I thank you very much, particularly the honor of making November 11th Paul Ignatius Day. As I say, I have the fondest memories of Glendale, and this brings that all alive to me once again. I'm sorry we can't be there in person, but the miracle of the modern digital age has enabled us to get together in this way with people from Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Glendale, Washington, D.C., so it's quite remarkable. But I thank you for honoring me. I'm not sure I deserve all these accolades, but you've certainly said some wonderful things, and I'm more than grateful. I value public service, and I commend all of you for your public service and on behalf of the citizens of Glendale. I always considered it an honor and really a reward. This country has offered all of us so much, and public service is a way to repay that in some way. So I commend all of you and wish you all well. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ignatius, I want to ask you something. You served under President Johnson, and
Yes.
you have been close to him, obviously. Do you have any memories that you want to share with us, or at least talk about why he didn't put his nomination in 1968 for re-election, which he could? Either one.
I was first appointed by President Kennedy, and I served the first year or so in government before the tragic ending of his life. And then the rest of my time, 8 years in total in the Pentagon, were under President Johnson. What can I tell you about President Johnson? He got things done. He was a powerful person. He wasn't very persuasive on television. Kennedy was. Kennedy had mastered the new technique of television. But in person, Johnson was fantastic. I remember once having to brief the president and the cabinet, and every time I'd make a point, he'd interrupt me and say, "Did you all hear that?" And I'd try to speak again, and the president would jump in. And there was an overwhelming power about him. And so I think his great legacy was the civil rights legislation. He got caught up in the controversies of the Vietnam War. And in response to your comment why he didn't run again, I think it was largely because of that. And that's what he said. He wanted to remove himself from the continuing controversy over that war. He was a very powerful figure, and Kennedy was inspiring. He was a true hero in World War II, and his greatest contribution to the nation was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the most dangerous time we've had since World War II. And he presided with patience and character, and eventually prevailed. So we were lucky to have him sitting in the president's chair at a time of enormous consequence and potential disaster.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, now the City of Glendale Mayor's Commendation presented to Paul Robert Ignatius 100th birthday celebration in recognition of your 100th birthday celebration and a monumental milestone. I wish you many more years of great health and, most importantly, happiness. Your life has been inspirational to many people in our community and around the United States. May you enjoy celebrating your special day with your loved ones. And on behalf of the City of Glendale, best wishes for a wonderful celebration. And thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank all of you. Thank you very, very much.
And of course, I have to show, yes, I forgot. So we have proclamation on my right hand, and I have City of Glendale Mayor's Commendation on my left hand for you. We will get it to you hopefully pretty soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's an
Thank you
honor.
very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
All
Thank
right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Best wishes to everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
All right.
So we will continue. What's next, Mr. Ajemian?
Two would be community.
So
Two would be community service and parks regarding the status of program planning for the fiscal year 2021, 2022 CDBG, ESG, and Home Annual Action Plan. One, council motion approving fiscal year 2021, 2022 CDBG program priorities, a fiscal year 21-22 proposed CDBG funding allocation plan by funding category, and issuance of an RFP to community agencies for CDBG and ESG public social services, and to community agencies for CDBG capital improvement project. Two, housing authority motion approving the fiscal year 21-22 CDBG program priorities, a fiscal year 21-22 proposed CDBG funding allocation plan by funding category, and issuance of an RFP to community agencies for CDBG, ESG, public social services, and the community agency for CDBG capital improvement project.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Mayor?
Mr.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm
Mr.
wondering
Najari.
if a representative from Hoover High School had a statement to make.
Oh, about Mr. Ignatius?
Yes.
Oh,
But I asked,
yeah,
anybody
Mr.
else wants to
yeah,
make
Mr.
comment? Nobody said anything. Okay, let's go. Of course, Mr. Ignatius is not here, I guess.
Mr.
But
Mayor,
however, yes,
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Golania.
that is correct. The principal of Hoover High did have plans to speak about Secretary Ignatius, but it appears like she's dropped off the line, so
So
we're
when
not able to get
she
her.
connects, maybe we do this and we record and give it to Mr. Ignatius.
Very good idea.
Yeah, but can somebody call and tell her that we are not done with the celebration?
Yeah, tell her to stand by and we'll have her back on, Mr. Mayor. I think that would be the best way.
Yeah, yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Golania.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members, City Council, Housing Authority Chair Devine, and members of the Housing Authority. We're going to go to Maggie Kavarian, Senior Community Services Supervisor, to provide a brief presentation on this item and then open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Alajanian, members of the City Council, members of the Housing Authority. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation for you today to review the 2021-2022 program planning for CDBG ESG and Home Annual Action Plan. The purpose of program planning is to determine the priorities for the coming year and to propose a funding allocation plan so we may issue an RFP to the community agencies for social services and capital improvement projects. At the October 12th meeting of our CDBG Advisory Committee, the funding allocation plan and the program priorities were reviewed and recommendations were made. Staff also provided a proposal timeline for 21 and 22 to the committee. Now, an important component of the program planning process is our citizen participation. This year, staff provided 3 platforms for community input. We updated the key demographic indicators, and then we reviewed the 5-year consolidated plan priorities. As mentioned in the previous slide, the HUD requires citizen participation as part of development and the planning to determine the priorities. And this year, with HUD guidance, due to COVID-19 pandemic, residents had 3 options. Residents had an option to email their comments in. We offered residents the opportunity to call in via telephone and to give their feedback. And then staff also held a public meeting via virtual, we held a virtual public meeting with 28 residents who participated, and we collected the comments. So the program priorities continue to be in line with the community needs assessment that was completed last year when we updated our consolidated plan. And the focus was on community facilities, public services, special needs services, housing, and business assistance. Slide 7 provides a breakdown of the funding allocation plan. These numbers are estimates at this time as staff puts together. We put this together until HUD releases the actual funding allocations, usually in late February or early March. The ESG program also serves homeless services, anticipates $165,000 in the coming year. The Home Partnership Program is estimating $1.3 million in funding for 2021-2022. And CDBG program is anticipating $2 million in funding in the coming year. We provided the Council and the Housing Authority with a breakdown of this funding, where 20% is reserved for program administration at $400,000, 15% is set aside for public social services programs at $300,000, and the bulk, 65%, goes directly to capital and neighborhood improvement projects, with $400,000 set aside for cities' pre-designated city park project this year at $400,000. The remaining $900,000 will be RFP'd to community agencies to apply for capital improvement funds. Little background on the city capital improvement project. In fiscal year 2021-2022, the Pacific Park Splash Pad project will provide $400,000 making improvements and redesign of the outdoor restrooms at Pacific Park. This is to comply with LA County Public Code requirements for our current splash pad project that's currently under construction. Also, it's to make upgrades to the restrooms for purposes of safety and privacy. We also wanted to provide the City Council and Housing Authority with a timeline of the process, which is really important. In September, we held our third annual CDBG open house, inviting local nonprofits to learn the how-tos of CDBG funding. We had 8 agencies in attendance, and this was a City Council directive that was given to us 3 years ago. We will issue a public notice for the RFP in November, on November 13th, and staff will hold a virtual technical assistance workshop to help nonprofits navigate the application and submission process. This is going to be done on December 3rd. And then proposals will be due on December 30th at 5 p.m., where staff anticipates up to 15 CDBG proposals be submitted. Usually between 10 and 12 tend to be social services program proposals, and 2 to 3 tend to be capital improvement program proposals. And then staff begins to review the proposals in January and forwards our analysis and packets to our CDBG Advisory Committee for their review. And then in late February, the committee meets to interview these agencies, and they make funding recommendations. Our ESG program follows a similar process, and they have their continuum of care board of directors who review their ESG proposals. The ESG program is actually a 2-year program that will be held, that is active from fiscal year 2021 to 2023. And then lastly, we'll return to City Council and Housing Authority in late May, early June for the approval to finalize the annual action plan that includes all the funded programs and agencies. Therefore, we respectfully request that the City Council and Housing Authority approve our 2021-2022 program priorities, funding allocation plan, and the issuance of an RFP for both CDBG and ESG programs. We also have the chair of the CDBG Advisory Committee, Mr. Zanku Armenian, who is available here for additional questions if they may arise. That concludes my presentation.
Before I go to my to callers or my colleagues, I want to ask you, nonprofit organizations, they call me and they say it's very hard to fill up the forms. There are too many pages, too information which we are asking them are cumbersome, and they are having difficulties for, let's say, 10,000, 15,000. Maybe they have to spend that much or more to do the paperwork's right. So is there anything we can do or you can add to those nonprofits which are complaining about the paperwork and other regulations, that we can invite them to join? Because 10, 15 organizations, they come forward, and in my opinion, all nonprofit organizations, they need money, they look for money, especially this year, especially now, because they didn't have any events, and they were unable to collect money because they have, like celebration or other matters that they organize, and they have been unable to do it this year. So what you can do that there will be more to encourage them to come forward?
Mayor Alajanian, members of the City Council, and members of the Housing Authority, this question came up 3 years ago, and this is why we included the CDBG open house. We really wanted to encourage nonprofits to attend so they can understand the inner workings of what the federal dollars, how the federal dollars are spent, how they have to report, how they have to apply. And we included that as an additional layer to what we already do, which is staff works from November up until January with nonprofits to ensure that their application and the instructions in the application are clearly defined. We work with them. We've had meetings, numerous meetings with nonprofits that have called us and are looking forward to applying. The problem with the paper intensiveness is it is not a city requirement, it's a HUD requirement. So this funding is federal, and it comes from Housing and Urban Development, and they have guidelines and rules we can't really get around. We have to report to them. And these are just guidelines and monitorings that we must do throughout the year. They provide quarterly reports, and it is paper intensive, and sometimes for $10,000, it might not be worth it. But we do encourage them to apply, give it a try, and then see how it works out in 1 year, and possibly the following year it gets easier as they get used to the funding and the way the reporting is done. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So the paperwork is not what we are asking for them. But do we have an employee who would help them to do the paperwork, right? Or we just say, go fill up this, and how this works? Because I don't know.
Mayor Alajanian, we have 3 staff that work in the CDBG program currently, and we are offering a technical support meeting, a workshop that's coming up in December. But we also have them call us, and we work one-on-one with them to help them fill out their paperwork, guide them, explain parts of the application to them, how to include their information, what to include, discussing the program priorities, whether to even apply, because sometimes their program might not be what the expectations are of the CDBG requirements.
I see. Okay. Is there, before I go to the commissioners, is there anybody else wants? Oh, do we have anybody on phone? No.
No, Mayor, we do not have any callers.
Okay. So anybody wants to comment on this item?
I have a comment, if I may.
Ms. Devine.
Yes, thank you. Can you please explain, Maggie, the questions that were added, page 4 in section 3 and page 7 in section 10 on solar panel systems and demonstrated need for CDBG funding? I understand, and I've heard before about issues that we've had with Home Men, Catholic Charities, and even perhaps others on why these were included, because I think they're a really good addition to the application.
Absolutely, Councilmember Devine. The RFP is really a work in progress. Every year we update it. We try to make it more and more user-friendly, I guess you could say. And as the interviews for the CDBG, when the CDBG interviews are done with the agencies, the community development block grant members really notice things that can be improved, the improvements that we can make. And one of the improvements that they noticed this particular year was in February of this year. And both CDBG capital improvement projects had similar concerns. And that was the logistical importance of the infrastructure requirement. The concerns were that each agency had applied for funding. They had applied for funding in previous years, but the problem was that, for instance, they had applied for solar panel project funding in years past, and now they were coming back and applying for roofing, where we would have preferred for them to apply for roofing first and then do the solar panel project. Now, I do have Chair Zanku Armenian with us, and I wanted him to kind of elaborate because he was one of the masterminds of asking us to kind of rework the RFP to include this, because we want to spend the CDBG dollars as best as we can and make the best use out of that funding. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him to give a little bit more perspective on the updates to the questions.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, members of the City Council. And Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Devine, one of the things is, solar panels and roofs are very much interrelated with each other because, once you put solar panels down, they lay on top of the roof. And so if you have to go back and redo the roof, then you have to lift all the solar panels up, and that's an extra expense. And that is exactly the situation that we were confronted with, and that's what led to this process improvement, where we said, at minimum, when you're doing a solar panel project, you have to also provide information about what is the life expectancy of the roof, what is the condition of the roof, so that we can always look at these things in a more holistic way, and we're not spending excess money on doing things backwards. And it's also something that the advisory committee has been trying to push the nonprofits toward, which is anything having to do with capital improvement, looking at the broader, what is the condition of their facility, doing a little bit of more forward planning so that it doesn't end up being onesie twosie projects. It kind of looks at their overall needs and kind of prioritizes the funding on the most urgent needs. So we're gradually moving in that direction. I think this is just one of those examples where hopefully this sort of rigor will allow us to be more efficient with the funds, and will help the organizations in being a little bit more, a little bit better in terms of their forward planning on their infrastructure and their facilities.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I was down at Home Minutemen, and they were, this was a while back, of course, before COVID, I think it was last year sometime, and they were removing solar panels. And I said, are those the solar panels that CDBG funding provided? And he said, yes, but we're having a problem. And I thought, wow, how does that happen? So I think this is brilliant. Thank you for thinking of that, and for putting these questions in there so that everything works out very smoothly and the money is used in the best way it can be.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment or questions from Ms. Kavarian?
I have some comments.
Yes, Mr. Brotman. Councilmember Brotman.
Yeah, a few things. First, on the community outreach, I read the comments, and there's a lot of interesting input. I guess what concerns me is that so few people participate in these things. And I know I brought this up in the briefing yesterday, and Maggie explained that 28 people attending is actually on the high end. But nonetheless, it just seems it seems tragic that we don't have more people getting involved in something. I think people do care about this, and I really wonder, whether we're doing enough to get the word out. I didn't have a chance to check with some groups that I talked to, but I'm wondering if the Glendale Environmental Coalition, the Glendale Tenants Union, the Homeowners Association, some of the other groups around the city, have we really reached out to make sure they know that this is happening? Because I do think that getting the 28 in a city of our size is just not. It's just not acceptable. That is one thing I know. Anyway, I don't know if Maggie, you want to say anything. We talked about it, but if there are any other ideas of what we can do to bring the public more into this process.
Excuse me, before she answers, 3 years ago when I came here, that was exactly my question, that how come all these nonprofit organizations, they are located in Glendale, and only 10 organizations, they come forward. The problem I learned at a later time is what I said a little bit earlier, that they come forward and then they have to spend like $10,000 to do the paperwork, and then they get like $6,000 or $10,000. I mean, they have to go through this, and then I guess city goes and inspects their books, right?
Yeah, correct.
And some of the organization, like they received $15,000, they returned it. They thought it's cost too much to get the information to city, and this is my experience 3 years ago. But that's why I was asking if we can help them to do the paperwork, not just answer their questions. Because they say they hired a company to do the paperwork. If that's the case, there's not much left for them to use, that's, I don't know how we can overcome that problem, because I said, I went through this, they all complain about too much paperwork, difficult to handle. So if we can find a way,
And,
anyway, but
And-
you
and-
can
and-
answer the,
If I
Mr.
could-
Broughton.
just to continue, yeah, because I'm talking about, I understand what you're saying, and that makes a lot of sense, but I'm talking about the other side. I'm talking about the community at large participating and giving input, and that's,
The residents.
the residents. That doesn't have anything to do with, the cost for nonprofits. So there are two issues here.
Okay.
Councilmember Brotman, to answer your question, and like I had mentioned in the briefing, we get between 10 and 14 residents that would show up in person. This is before the COVID-19 pandemic. And the way it looks to us is with the 28, we were actually very excited when we had 28 participants this particular year due to the new platforms. So we were considering for our spring meeting, which we will have in March, to continue with the 3 platforms, even if COVID-19 guidelines are set aside. And we'll have in-person and we will have virtual meetings, because they tend to be easier, I think, for residents to attend. We are going to try the next door option. That was one of the resident comments that came to us, and we thought that was a really good option. Of course, GUSD, Peach Jar. We've tried the newspaper. We haven't had very good reception with the newspaper. It doesn't seem, people aren't reading the newspaper and attending these meetings anymore. It seems to be email driven at this point, so we will reach out to as many nonprofits, as many residents as much as we can through our CSP newsletter, through our City Connections newsletter, and we'll definitely get the word out through social media, because we do post it often when we are going to be promoting our resident community meetings. We do it often on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, if I could add a word to what you said, Maggie. As the committee also strives to publicize it ourselves, I will say that unfortunately, the federal paperwork is the federal paperwork. And so while this is not a rule, what I'm about to say, we do generally as a committee recognize what Mayor Agajanian said, which is, you have to spend a certain amount to get a certain amount. And so we try not to divide up the pot below $10,000, because we recognize that there's that issue that is it really worth the effort. A lot of nonprofits don't have full-time staff, or if they have staff, it's one person. And so unfortunately, the paperwork can be very consuming. And so they have to either hire someone to help them for that application, but then there's the reporting requirements that go with the proposal should it be accepted and funded. So this is a little bit of a dilemma. I would say that we try our best to break in new entrants into the pool each time, because as Maggie mentioned, once they do it once, it gets a little bit easier, because some of the legwork that they do that first time can be reused in the future. They just update certain pieces of information, like their financial reports for that particular year would get updated and things like that. We try and be helpful, and I know that staff, I really want to commend the staff, because they really go out of their way. We hear from new organizations all the time that, how much time the staff does in fact spend with them to hold their hands, especially if they're new applicants for the first time. So I think that's just, kind of the way it's kind of constructed in terms of the paperwork, unfortunately. In terms of participation, participation generally, as you all know, it's always difficult to get, citizens and organizations to participate. It's not for lack of trying, I can assure you, because I think staff really goes out of their way to publicize it. Now, maybe personal phone calls can always make a difference. Councilmember Brotman, I do agree with that. I can stress the importance of participation in these, because these meetings are how the committee, and staff work together to prioritize where we take this small amount of funds to make a difference in our city. So, but as you know, engagement is always a challenging thing.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Brockman.
If I could continue, I had some other comments, but
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, on that, I would say, like, for instance, the Glendale Tenants Union, that would be an ideal group to go to. They would be able to reach out to a lot of people. They didn't get an email on this, so they had no idea. The Glendale Environmental Coalition, as far as I know, didn't get an email, so they had no idea. I don't know if the homeowners associations got any notification. So these are simple things to send emails to these groups, and these groups can be our conduit to a lot of people. Just I think next time, I really think 28 is just not, doesn't cut it in a city our size. And I know how hard it is to get people out to things, but when you try and when you get groups, get some groups helping, right? Get some civic organizations helping. I think then you get the then you get that leverage, and you can achieve a lot more. So just for next time. I mean, I know it's water under the bridge, but just saying that. The other thing I was going to say is, and maybe it does tie a little bit into this issue of the cost of nonprofits. One of the things I understand, again, talking to Maggie yesterday, is we haven't for a number of years focused on neighborhood beautification. And I'm sure all of us on council hear this constantly. I know I did, especially campaigning, is people talking about, in certain areas, just the blight, just the trash on the streets, the cracked sidewalks, just, kind of disrepair. And I'm wondering if this might be something that we could contribute. We could allocate more money to, what do we call the pre-designated projects. If we could have some more money go through the city to work on things like street trees in some of these neighborhoods that we're trying to address. Could we, well, this maybe would be through nonprofit, but could we fund some, we've been talking about murals. Could we fund some building art, fixing up sidewalks, removing trash, things like that? I think would be worthy and would spread the benefits of this across many people, getting people to just, feel a little bit better about their neighborhoods, and et cetera. So that's something I would like the committee to advisory committee to think about. Also, community gardens. I know we have several community gardens and they're way oversubscribed and they're long waiting lists. And that's a great way to get people, old and young, get people kind of engaged in growing food, right? It's something for a lot of kids, they don't have a backyard. They don't have any way to experience what it's like to grow tomatoes, and eat them, and they're fresh and they're organic and all that kind of stuff. So I would love to see some more of that. Anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you.
I have a question.
1 second, Mr. Golanian wants, I guess, to answer something, so then we go to Ms. Devine. Mr. Golanian.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, members of the Housing Authority. Just to follow up on Mr. Brockman's comments, just wanted to remind and bring it forward, Council and Housing Authority, that in the years past, it was a decision of the City Council and the Housing Authority to shift funds away from capital improvement projects and focus it more on community services programs. That doesn't mean that can be reversed, and we can put funding through the advisory committee, CDBG advisory committee, towards more capital improvement and neighborhood beautification projects.
Thank you. Ms. Devine.
Well, I was just going to ask about the purview of what Mr. Broadman was talking about, because I don't know, I'm looking at the focus of the CDBG and the funding, and it's social services and the homeless and housing, and not as much infrastructure. We're using other funding for that sort of thing. I think that with the limited amount of money that we have to be careful that we don't spread it out too far, that it doesn't do anybody any good at all. And I think we have to keep that under consideration. I think it's really important that we support the programs that we are supporting for the homeless and those that are in need. And if you look over the different allocations that have been made by the CDBG. I think we would all agree that they're very important in our community to a lot of people. And to start spreading it out for trees and murals, and I just don't think that's appropriate. I wouldn't support that.
Okay,
thank
can I just make a quick response?
Mr. Brotman, Councilmember Brotman.
I understand, Councilmember Devine, having different opinions on this, but it is the focus, one of the clear focus areas of this whole program. If you look at, what HUD was after, and it's in the description there, this was originally about, conditions of slums and blight, and neighborhood beautification is a key, possible area for these kinds of programs, right? And I believe we did this before. So I'm not questioning, whether you think it's important or not, but I do think it is certainly within the purview of the grants that we get from HUD to do that kind of work if we chose to do it. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Najarian?
No, with regard to the community beautification, I know we do allocate a certain sum towards the code enforcement portion, which identifies the problems and gets individual property owners to rehabilitate. But other than that, there's a lot of critical needs. And I'm not saying that the other, sidewalks and gardens aren't needs, but some of these other services, the Loaves and Fishes, Catholic Charities, Armenian Relief Society, they're keeping people out of homelessness and sometimes giving them the only meal that they're going to have all day. So we're just dealing with so many needs and just a limited amount of funding from the government. That's just my consideration.
Thank you. I just have a question. Oh, you want to answer something, Mr. Cavari? Okay. I have a question on community input received on page 5. You said there is 4 emails, 28, I guess, participate in WebEx. And was there any complaint from the public you contacted about what we are doing?
Well, Mayor Alajanian, we invite them to attend the WebEx meeting, the virtual community meeting, and they give us their input, and we put it in there exactly as they put it, exactly as they stated. And in this case, it was in the chat box that we took. And then we would write down their comments and concerns that they had. So it's definitely the way it's written in Exhibit 1 is exactly the way they stated it to us.
Oh. But they did not complain to the way we are handling this.
Residents usually have concerns. I wouldn't call them complaints so much, but they really did appreciate the fact that we were asking for their input because they are a major part of this process. This money isn't just allocated through our committee and by way of the city council. It really is a 3-layered process. It's the citizens, it's our committee, and then our city council and housing authority. And I think that part they really truly appreciate it because that's something we state right in the beginning of the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Kawaria. Okay, I have 2 questions since then I go to Mr. Kasakian. On page 7 of the report, I heard it, but I want to be on the record, and you say you considered 500,000 for
The pool, the water.
design from the city council. Their staff had to estimate the cost for 500,000, but the committee changed it to 400,000. Can you comment on that? Why the 100,000 was reduced from that? I guess this was
a staff recommendation.
Staff recommendation. So,
correct. Mayor Alajanian, members of the City Council, and members of the Housing Authority, at the time that we wrote the report and presented it to the CDBG Advisory Committee, we had anticipated $500,000 for the splash pad project. We hadn't received the pre-concept designs. We are awaiting 3 concept designs for that project, for the restroom remodel. And the committee felt that at the time that we presented that report, there wasn't enough information for them to approve $500,000 or to make recommendations on that. So they proposed that we reduce it by $100,000, and we set aside $400,000 to the city pre-designated project and use that $100,000 towards community projects for capital improvement and give the community agencies a chance to apply through an RFP process. Of course, these funds are, they're an estimate. We will receive, and HUD will release the final allocation for our program, most likely in late February or early March of this year, this coming year. And once they do, the CDBG Advisory Committee will meet again, and we will reconsider and reevaluate the restroom project, the splash pad project, and see how many proposals come in, because we really don't know how many proposals will come in from community agencies as well. And if I'm sure Chair Sanko Armenian is on as well, if he'd like to make a few comments on that, since you were part of that discussion.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, members of the Housing Authority. One of the things that we are also a little bit worried about is throwing a number out there without kind of the appropriate backing or justification, and bidders then saying, I'm going to bid to that number because that's how much you budgeted for it. There were some committee members who were also concerned about $500,000, it costing $500,000 for that particular project. So in an effort to be a little bit more prudent, and as well as kind of be more mindful of the amounts we're talking about, we decided to lower it a little bit, and then we would come back and revisit once the design cost estimates, once we have more concrete design cost estimates that can back up the actual amount that was being proposed.
Okay, thank you for the information. Now, on page 10 of the report, not the one you provided, our book here. Home entitlement. It said 2020, 2021, 1,373,723. And for 2021 to 2022, that has been reduced to 1,300,000. You want to comment on that?
Absolutely,
Please.
Mayor Alajanian. The number, that 1.3 million number, is an estimate. We don't know yet what our final allocation will be. HUD is right now, I should say the federal government right now is on a continuing resolution. The federal budget has not passed yet. As soon as the federal budget passes, we should be getting the release of the final allocations for the home, ESG, and CDBG program. So that 1.3 million is just an assumption that we're making, that because we received 1.373 million this year, we're going to get about the same. So we don't want to go up too high, and we don't want to go low too low. We just want to keep it at that. So that is not a final number.
Okay.
That's just an estimate.
Okay, Mr. Safia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think that staff has done a fine job as they can under the circumstances. One of the questions I have is whether, the mayor, there was at one point, at least up until a year ago, I know we haven't done one this year, I believe, a nonprofit summit in the city of Glendale. And that nonprofit summit list is, I believe, fairly exhaustive from the work that the city manager's office did to put it together. My question to Ms. Kavarian, and I know the answer, but I'd like to just have it out there for the record. Ms. Kavarian, do you use that list to do your outreach?
Councilmember Kasakian, that is correct. We work with the city manager's office, and what we do is we've had 2 nonprofit summits, and our chair, actually, Zankus Armenian, was one of the panelists on at the first nonprofit summit, and we do work very closely with the city manager's office on both of the summits. And what we do is we consolidate and update those nonprofit lists each year.
Okay, good. Thank you. I know that there's new nonprofits that come on board. You know, I'm not too familiar with what the status specifically is of the groups that were mentioned, but if they're nonprofits, then, you know, let's certainly add them to that list. And one of the things that I would suggest is that perhaps at an upcoming summit or prior to that, given when the deadlines are, that your shop does a workshop, does a informative meeting for nonprofits that are interested in applying to CDBG funding in general. I'm not necessarily supportive of the shifting at this point of the priorities, because I do remember in the past when the social service organizations took heavy hits in terms of cuts. I remember a time when the CDBG funds were far greater than what were allocated today. And these are organizations that are doing the work that the city is unable to do, that we cannot reach every individual or group for a variety of reasons. That's not to say that there isn't blight or that we can't do anything to get rid of blight. But the only thing I would say to my colleagues is that that is our responsibility. That is, I think, what the city should be doing: painting out graffiti, fixing potholes, fixing sidewalks, beautifying the parkways. It's the bread and butter of local governance. So if we can't do that ourselves, I don't know if we should be relying on a very tenuous source of federal funding for that. The federal funding, I believe, should be going to the nonprofits that are doing the social welfare, social outreach, the homeless outreach. And there's going to be plenty more of that to do in the coming years, unfortunately. So thank you, Ms. Kavarian. Thank you, staff, for this. And those are my only comments.
Is there any more comments from my colleagues?
No, I'll move the item.
One second, before we go to that, I want to ask CDBG Advisory Committee, beside Mr. Zanku Armenian, anybody else is joined us? Do you know Mr. Armenian? Anybody else is?
I do not believe so, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Divan.
I will move the item for council.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Councilmember Brotman,
Yes.
Divine,
Yes.
Kasakian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
and Mayor Agajanian.
Yes,
And do I have a motion from housing?
I move the item.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Laura. Roll call, please.
Authority Member Agajanian,
Yes,
Brotman,
Yes.
Kasakian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Parazian,
Yes.
Chair Divine.
Yes.
okay, Ms. Kavarian, thank you very much for the report, and CDBG Advisory Committee, thank you very much, Mr. Zanku Armenian. And
Mayor, it looks like
I'm
there's,
sorry.
Mayor, it looks like there's a call that just came in. I'm trying to see which item
Okay,
this person.
we will wait, check, see if.
Yes, the caller called about 50 seconds ago, and it's about the joint item we just went through, Mayor. Would you like to reopen this and get the
Yes,
caller?
yes.
Or listen to the caller?
So let's listen to the caller, as long as they called, so.
Yeah, just for the record, I mean, the item had been called over an hour ago, so certainly within your
Maybe
purview to
just
hear the
listen.
comment, but we don't need to
Yeah.
reopen the matter.
For the future, maybe we consider.
Mr. Milano, you're live. Mr. Milano? It looks like Mr. Milano has dropped the call.
I see. Thank you. Anyway, thank you for the color. Okay, now what's next, Mr. Adrian?
Move to adjourn.
Next would be adjournment.
Okay,
Second.
I have it. So I have,
Okay, adjournment for housing?
okay,
Move
let
to
me
adjourn.
close this with that said. The
Second
meeting
for
is
housing.
adjourned at 3:18 p.m. Now, Ms. Devine.
Thank you. Adjournment for housing?
Second.
Move.
Thank you. We are adjourned at 19.